The boarding pass in Caroline Webb's hand still showed Erica Langston, 1A paid first gate verified. Captain Stephen Carver asked whether she was actually a revenue passenger. I was standing just inside the forward galley of Evermont Atlantic Flight 613. I was waiting for the final dispatch packet before we closed the door for London. As the relief first officer on a long-haul crew, I had no responsibility for selling seats, but I did have responsibility for knowing when a cabin issue could become an operational one. Caroline checked the pass again. Full revenue, gate already verified it. Stephen looked past her toward 1A. Erica was sitting quietly with a worn leather tote beneath the console and several pages of financial reports spread across her tray table. The man in 1B was dressed much more like the people Stephen normally greeted by name in the forward cabin. Nobody had asked whether his fare was real, whether he had upgraded, or whether he belonged there. Stephen pointed toward Erica. Check whether it's employee travel. Caroline's hand stopped over her tablet. It isn't. Companion booking? No. Courtesy upgrade? Paid first class. The record had answered him 3 times. He kept looking for another answer. I had already seen the beginning of it at the gate about 20 minutes earlier. Stephen had cut through the priority lane on his way to the aircraft and clipped Erica's shoulder hard enough to knock her boarding pass onto the carpet. Instead of apologizing, he told her flight crew needed the lane clear. Erica picked up the pass and said, evenly, I was already in the lane. Stephen looked at her clothes, then at the priority sign above her. You're boarding up here? Yes. I had been close enough to hear it, but I kept walking with the dispatch folder under my arm. Captains could be impatient during boarding, and I told myself that was all I had seen. Now he was standing beside 1A with the same expression. Erica looked up from her documents. Is there a problem with my reservation? Stephen rested one hand on the outer shell of the seat. There's a question about whether this seat should have been released. Caroline turned her tablet so he could see the cabin record. It wasn't released. Stephen barely looked at it. You were confrontational with flight crew at the gate. Erica's eyes moved toward me because I had been there. What did I do? Before Stephen answered, I said, she was standing in the priority lane. She didn't block crew movement. Stephen looked at me. This is a cabin decision, Miles. The tone wasn't loud, but it shut the discussion down the way command authority does when everyone still wants the aircraft to leave on time. Erica stayed seated. Is my ticket valid? Yes, Caroline said. Erica looked at Stephen. Has there been a safety issue since I boarded? Stephen's jaw tightened. I don't need to wait for one before managing the cabin. That was the point where the explanation changed. He had stopped questioning whether she had paid for 1A because the system would not support that suspicion. Now the conversation at the gate had become the reason she could not remain directly behind the cockpit. Stephen told Caroline to move Erica to 35E, the last open seat in economy. Caroline hesitated. That's a middle seat. I know. Erica folded her papers, placed them inside her tote, and stood. If I refuse the downgrade, then you can leave the aircraft and rebook. She looked at him for several seconds, then picked up her bag. I'll move. There was no argument after that. Caroline entered the relocation in her cabin notes as captain directed, not voluntary. She escorted Erica toward the rear. I watched her disappear behind the premium economy curtain while the passenger in 1B returned to his newspaper. Before pushback, I walked the cabin during my final coordination check. Erica was in 35E with her laptop open on a tray that leaned slightly toward the aisle. Jenna Cole, working the aft section, told me Erica had asked only for water and the Wi-Fi information. After takeoff, Stephen made a routine cruise announcement until the final sentence. He thanked everyone for their patience with a boarding delay caused by passenger confusion over cabin procedures. Nobody had to ask who he meant. Several hours later, during my relief rotation, I entered the cockpit. I saw an arrival coordination request open on the communications screen. Passenger review on arrival, potential interference with crew authority. I read the name beneath it. Erica Langston. She had been sitting in 35E since Chicago. I looked at Stephen. What happened after departure? He kept his eyes on the screen. He did not give me a new event. Stephen kept the arrival request open on the communications screen while I waited for him to explain what Erica Langston had done after leaving 1A. He never identified anything new. She challenged my authority before departure, he said. London can speak with her when we land. That happened before she moved. Stephen turned toward me. You were there. I was. She moved when you directed her to. The distinction mattered because an arrival security handoff was not supposed to become a second version of an argument that had already ended. If Stephen had seen new behavior that affected flight safety, I wanted it documented. If he had not, I was not willing to have my position on the crew make his description look independently confirmed. I called Caroline on the interphone. Any issue with 35E since departure? Caroline checked with the aft cabin before answering. Nothing reported. Jenna confirmed the same thing several minutes later. Erica had used the Wi-Fi, worked on her laptop, eaten part of the meal service, and followed every cabin instruction given to her. Stephen sent the request anyway. I did not have authority to block a captain from requesting an arrival conversation. I added my own operational note stating that I had witnessed no threat, interference, or refusal after the passenger complied with the relocation. Stephen saw me enter it. You think that's necessary? If my name is attached to the crew record, yes. He looked back toward the windshield and ended the conversation there. Later, during a routine walk through the cabin, I saw Stephen stop beside 35E. I was several rows behind him, waiting for a passenger to clear the aisle, so I heard enough of what followed. You've made this trip harder than it needed to be, he told Erica. She closed her laptop halfway. Has security been requested in London? Stephen rested one hand on the seat back beside her. They'll decide what happens after we land. Erica studied him for a moment, then reopened the laptop. She did not argue. That made the arrival request harder for me to understand, not easier. Near descent, the cockpit printer produced an executive priority message from London operations. Stephen tore it free before I could reach for it. The instructions were unusual but specific. Flight 613 was to park at the assigned stand. Crew members were to remain available after arrival. Executive transition representatives would board the aircraft, and Erica Langston was to remain available for direct contact. Routine flight and cabin documentation was to be retained. Stephen read the message twice. Then he smiled. London picked it up. I took the paper from him and read it myself. There was no instruction to detain Erica. No allegation of criminal conduct. No direction from airport police. It says executive contact, I told him. Stephen folded the message. They don't send senior people to an aircraft for nothing. That was true. It didn't mean what he thought it did. When we reached Heathrow, airport police vehicles and corporate security were visible clustered near the stand. None of the officers rushed toward the aircraft. They remained outside while ground crews connected the jet bridge. Andrew Sutton, Evermont Atlantic's vice president of flight operations, boarded with Thomas Keating from the executive transition team. Stephen stepped out of the cockpit before either man reached the galley. The passenger is in 35E, he said. I can have her brought forward. Andrew looked directly at him. Where is Miss Langston? Caroline went aft. A few minutes later, Erica appeared at the front of the cabin, carrying the same worn tote she had brought aboard in Chicago. She stopped several feet from us. Thomas approached her first. Ms. Langston, the ownership closing became effective this morning. The transition team is ready whenever you are. Stephen's face changed. Andrew looked at him before anyone could explain further. Captain Erica Langston is Evermont Atlantic's controlling shareholder and incoming chief executive. Nobody said anything for several seconds. Stephen looked from Andrew to Erica, then toward me, as though one of us might provide a different version. Andrew did not let the title settle the operational question. Why was she moved from 1A? Stephen described a confrontational passenger. He said there were concerns about crew authority. Andrew turned to Caroline. She complied with the relocation, Caroline said. Then he looked at me. Did you observe a flight safety event involving Miss Langston? No. That answer came easier than it had in Chicago. Stephen was removed from continuing command duties pending review. The following morning, a newspaper story appeared claiming Evermont's new owner had punished a senior captain for making an unpopular safety decision. That afternoon, I was called into a formal review with Rachel Monroe from Employee Conduct. On the screen in front of us were two records created hours apart. Caroline's cabin entry said Erica had complied with the captain-directed relocation. Stephen's later request described potential interference with crew authority. Rachel placed the timestamps side by side. Between those two entries, nobody could identify a new event. Rachel Monroe did not ask whether Erica Langston owned the airline. She waited until after the review had reconstructed what had happened to her as a passenger. The first record showed 1A confirmed and paid. The next showed Stephen Carver questioning the fare even after Caroline Webb verified it. Then came the captain-directed relocation and Erica's compliance. Jenna Cole's economy cabin report, my operational note, and finally Stephen's arrival request described potential interference with crew authority. Rachel put the sequence on one screen. What changed after she moved? Stephen's representative answered first. The captain remained concerned about the interaction. Rachel looked at the timestamps. That describes his concern. I'm asking what the passenger did. No one produced a new event. The passenger video from 1B added context. It showed Stephen questioning Erica's right to 1A. He left the unfamiliar white passenger beside her, completely alone. Caroline confirmed that Stephen had asked whether Erica was traveling on an employee pass, companion booking, or courtesy upgrade. He did this even after the system identified her as a full revenue passenger. The review did not need Stephen to admit racial bias. His decisions had already created the comparison. Evermont terminated him after the formal process for discriminatory treatment. They also found abuse of command authority, inaccurate security, escalation, and retaliation after a passenger had complied with his instruction. Erica did not sign the employment finding. Because she had been the person directly affected, employee conduct and legal handled the decision without placing her in the chain that determined his punishment. I thought that would end my involvement. It did not. Flight 613 had raised another question that Rachel wanted answered. How often had Stephen personally directed premium seat releases or passenger movements outside normal safety operations? Compliance pulled a limited sample of his prior captain-directed cabin changes. Most had legitimate explanations. Several did not. Those records involved premium seats released for travelers who had no ordinary upgrade entitlement, and the same small group of names appeared more than once. When finance compared those transactions with expense records and outside payment information obtained during the inquiry, the pattern became harder to dismiss. The discrimination case had not proved fraud. It had pointed investigators toward the exact authority Stephen had repeatedly used. The company referred the financial evidence to the appropriate authorities. Months later, an employee governance notice informed us that Stephen had entered a guilty plea on fraud-related counts connected to unauthorized premium seat arrangements. He agreed to restitution. There was no courtroom spectacle in the notice, just dates, findings, and the end of his relationship with Evermont. The airline changed several procedures before that case was finished. A captain could still relocate any passenger for a genuine safety reason, but a seat change based on passenger conduct now required an observable event to be entered in the cabin record. An arrival security request had to identify whether the issue involved actual safety behavior or a customer service dispute, and a passenger who had already complied could not be escalated without new conduct. Premium seat releases changed too. Captains could no longer direct them for non-safety purposes. Ground control had to approve any exception outside the normal inventory process. For augmented crews like ours, a new operational descent field allowed another qualified flight crew member or the purser to record a factual disagreement. This did not override the captain's immediate safety authority. I kept my job. So did Caroline and Jenna. Nobody handed me another stripe for writing what I had actually seen. Several months later, after a recurrent simulator session at the London base, I cut through a maintenance hangar on my way back to operations. A staff listening session was underway in one corner. There was no stage and no company photographer. Mechanics, gate employees, cabin crew, and ramp staff sat in ordinary folding chairs while a ramp agent described a turnaround staffing problem. I recognized Erica in the second row. She had a notebook open across her knee. Nobody was standing because she had entered. Nobody was waiting for her to speak. The ramp agent finished his sentence before Erica wrote anything down. The last time I saw Erica Langston, nobody was moving out of her way. She was sitting there, listening. This story is fictional.